I think we have a point of order from the Honourable House Leader from the official opposition.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I'm rising on a point of order related to Government Motion number 11, which is scheduled for debate later this morning. By rising today, I'm asking, Mr. Speaker, that you divide the motion for debating and voting purposes. Recognizing that you will require time to consider the matter, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising now as soon as the House opened today. The procedure which I am seeking to invoke is not referenced in any specific standing order, but rather it falls under the general structures of Standing Order 1, quote, in all cases not provided for hereinafter or by other order of the House, procedural questions shall be decided by the Speaker or Chair of the Committees of the Whole, whose decision shall be based on the usages, forms, customs, and precedents of the House of Commons of Canada, end quote. As to those customs and precedents, I would refer the Chair to page 570 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition. Quote, when a complicated motion comes before the House, for example, a motion containing 2 or more parts, each capable of standing on its own, the Speaker has the authority to modify it in order to facilitate decision-making in the House. When any member objects to a motion containing 2 or more distinct propositions, he or she may request that the motion be divided and that each proposition be debated and voted on separately, end quote. Government Motion number 11 is an omnibus motion, which, in the words of Bosk and Gagnon, contains 2 or more parts, each capable of standing on its own. Looking at the motion on the order paper, Mr. Speaker, it could, I think, be divided into at least 7 separate questions. First, we have paragraphs A and B and subparagraph C2, which concern extending sitting hours and consequential arrangements. Second, we have subparagraph C1, which contains voting on the main estimates and supplementary estimates in the current supply period. Third, we have paragraph C3, which would waive the 1 sitting day waiting period between the report and 3rd reading stages. Fourth, we have subparagraph C4, which would allow the Prime Minister, with the votes of his coalition partners in the NDP, to shut down the House for the summer whenever the political heat gets to be too much for him. Fifth, we have paragraph D, which would make provisions for voting on government business on June 22nd and 23rd if the House is even still sitting then. Sixth, we have paragraph E, which would change the mandate of the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying. And seventh, we have the final paragraph, which would permanently amend the standing orders to include the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation among the named holidays when the House would not sit. The final part of Government Motion number 11 is, Mr. Speaker, the most jaded and cynical part of the entire package. Every party in this House and every member in this House understands and believes in the importance of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. To try to stitch this House's own internal act of recognition and implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 80 to a procedural motion with such a crassly partisan motivation to be able to ram bills through the House and then shutter our elected legislature is a nakedly cynical maneuver. Is there any wonder, Mr. Speaker, why reconciliation efforts continue to stumble and stall under this Liberal government? It's because of political tactics and stunts like this. If ever there was a reason to draw upon the special practice among the House procedure, it is for exactly this particular situation. As Mr. Speaker McNaughton explained on June 15, 1964, at page 428 of the journals, this practice can be traced to the April 19, 1888 ruling given by the United Kingdom's Mr. Speaker Peel, quote, it may be for the convenience of the House that the honourable gentleman's 2 propositions should be put together, but if any honourable gentleman objects to their being taken together, they will be put separately, end quote. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, there are very few cases for you to rely upon, but they are catalogued by Bosque and Gagnon at pages 570 and 571. One of your predecessors, the honourable member from Regina Capel, observed on October 17, 2013, at page 65 of the debates, quote, "In adjudicating cases of this kind, the chair must always be mindful to approach each new case with a fresh eye, taking into account the particular circumstances of the situation at hand. Often, there is little in the way of guidance for the Speaker, and the strict compliance with precedent is not always appropriate," end quote. I would observe, in point of fact, most of the situations where the chair did undertake an intervention of some variety occurred on procedural types of motions, not dissimilar to the one which will come before the House today. In 1991, a motion to make a series of amendments to the standing orders was divided for voting purposes. In 2002, a motion concerning government bills, the business of a special committee, and the modification of the Finance Committee's pre-budget consultations was divided for debating purposes and then further divided for voting purposes. In 2013, a motion concerning the reinstatement of government bills and committee business, along with the temporary management of the House and committee business, was divided for voting purposes. Of these precedent cases, today's motion comes closest, I believe, to the situation the House faced 20 years ago. Now, I will admit, Mr. Speaker, that there are some parts of Government Motion Number 11 which might be convenient to group together for a common debate. Take, for example, the provisions of extending sitting hours and on votes demanded on June 22nd and 23rd. However, there are other portions which are simply stitched together for apparent efficiency by a government which continues to mismanage its parliamentary agenda and this House's time. We have, on the one part, temporary measures to structure the rest of the spring sitting, and then there is the extension of the Special Joint Committee's work through the summer and autumn, and finally, as I discussed earlier, a permanent standing order amendment as part of the reconciliation process. Procedurally, distinct debates and votes are justifiable for these matters, I would submit. Morally, the proposal for the House to discuss and acknowledge reconciliation with Indigenous peoples should be kept far, far away from the political controversy baked into Government Motion Number 11's other components. Reconciliation between the House of Commons with Indigenous peoples should be acknowledged in a mature manner, appropriate to the gravity of the issue and the common cause which I hope all honourable members could unite behind. This Liberal government, however, with their new Democrat coalition partners, want to wedge and divide Canadians time and time again. This time it's to try to leverage deeply objectionable proposals to ram a divisive legislated agenda through Parliament as an opportunity to claim that some members in this House oppose reconciliation. In reality, Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Instead, the only thing that should be divided is Government Motion Number 11. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I ask you to do the right thing and exercise the authority vested in you by Standing Order 1 and by the precedents of this House to divide Government Motion Number 11 for debating and voting purposes along the lines which I have laid out to you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Thank you, member, for the intervention. So, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising to respond to the point of order from the member opposite, who claims the Government Motion Number 11 is a complicated question and should be divided for the purposes of debating and voting. I submit that this is not the case, Mr. Speaker. The motion's unifying theme is to organize the business of the House for the remaining weeks in the spring sitting period. As members will know, there have been many motions before the House that were lengthy and dealt solely with the business of the House. Let me draw members' attention to the motions this House has adopted to meet in a hybrid sitting and to require members to be fully vaccinated or have valid medical exemption to participate in proceedings of the House. The motion and other motions this House has adopted since the beginning of the pandemic have been subject to a single debate and a single vote. And I believe that should be the approach taken with the government with respect to motion number 11. The motion has a clear unifying theme, organizing the business of the House. The House has seen many such motions in the past, and precedents suggest that this type of motion has not been divided for either the purposes of debating or for voting, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, member, for that intervention. Je pense que